The cold that no one was supposed to notice. The November sky hung low over London, heavy and colorless, as if even the clouds understood the weight of remembrance. Rows of veterans stood in solemn formation near the cenotaph, medals resting against pressed coats, reflecting pale morning light. The crowd behind the barriers stood shoulder to shoulder, breath fogging into the air, scarves pulled tight, hands buried in pockets. And at the center of it all stood Catherine. So composed, perfect, exactly as she had been trained to be. The navy coat she wore was elegant but thin, tailored more for appearance than protection. Cameras captured her from every angle, the future queen standing strong, honoring sacrifice. No one saw her fingers slowly losing feeling inside her gloves. No one saw the tiny tremor that began in her wrists. No one was supposed to, because royals did not shiver. Royals endured. Behind the royal line stood Royal Guard officer Thomas Hale. 8 years of service. 0 recorded mistakes. A man known among his unit for discipline that bordered on obsession. He noticed everything. And today he noticed her. At first it was small, a shift in her shoulders. Then the faint tightening of her jaw. Then the almost invisible way she pressed her elbows closer to her sides, trying to trap warmth. The wind cut through the square like a blade. Thomas's training told him, hold position. His instincts told him, she's freezing. The ceremony continued. The king stepped forward first. Then Queen Camilla. Then Prince William. Then Catherine. She walked with measured grace, heels tapping softly against stone. She laid the wreath. Bowed her head. Stepped back. But when she returned to her place, Thomas saw it clearly now. Her lips had lost color. Her breath came faster. Her hands trembled, not dramatically, not enough for cameras, but enough for someone trained to read danger. And to Thomas this was danger. Not dramatic danger. Not visible danger. But real. Cold could make someone faint. Cold could slow reaction time. Cold could harm someone already physically strained, though he didn't know why, only that she looked fragile in a way he couldn't explain. The bugle call began. Silence fell across thousands of people. 2 minutes stretched into forever. Thomas felt the cold too. But he was trained for it. Conditioned for it. She wasn't. He glanced once, just once, toward Queen Camilla. She stood perfectly still. Untouched by the wind. Expression carved from marble. Protocol lived in her posture. Thomas swallowed. Guards do not move. Guards do not interfere. Guards do not make decisions. Unless protection is required. His heart pounded. The silence ended. The prayer began. And Catherine's shoulders trembled again. That was it. Before his mind could stop him, Thomas moved. 1 step forward. Then another. So subtle most wouldn't notice. But Queen Camilla noticed. Her eyes snapped toward him instantly. Sure. Measuring. Cold in a completely different way. Thomas removed his ceremonial outer cloak, thick wool lined, built for hours in brutal weather. He stepped beside Catherine carefully, respectfully, quickly, like adjusting a uniform detail. Without a word, he placed it over her shoulders. For half a second, time stopped. Catherine blinked in surprise. Their eyes met only briefly. There was shock there. Then relief. Then something deeper. Gratitude. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Cameras were everywhere. But she pulled the cloak closer around herself. And for the first time in nearly an hour, her shoulders relaxed. Thomas stepped back into position. Now standing exposed to the wind in only his uniform jacket. Across the line, Queen Camilla's stare could have frozen glass. But Thomas didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead. The ceremony ended. The royals moved away in formation. Catherine kept the cloak on. Inside the royal vehicle later, Prince William spoke quietly. You could have taken it off. She shook her head. I couldn't feel my hands, she whispered. I thought I might collapse. William went silent. Because that was something no one would ever see in headlines. Back at the barracks, Thomas was summoned immediately. Commander Ellis sat behind a polished desk. Explain, he said simply. Thomas stood straight. The Princess of Wales was showing signs of physical distress due to extreme cold. I acted to preserve her well-being. You broke protocol. Yes, sir. You embarrassed senior leadership. Silence. Then Thomas said quietly, if protecting her embarrasses leadership, I would do it again. Commander Ellis stared at him for a long time, then sighed. You're a good soldier, Hale? Boss. But today, you made powerful enemies. That evening in her private sitting room, Catherine sat alone. The cloak rested folded beside her. She ran her fingers across the fabric slowly. Someone had risked their career, for her comfort. Not because they had to, because they chose to. Across the palace, Queen Camilla stood at her window. Her lady-in-waiting waited silently behind her. "Find out everything about that guard," Camilla said. "Yes, ma'am." "Not to punish," Camilla added quietly. The lady hesitated. "Then why?" Camilla didn't turn around. "Because kindness inside systems built on discipline is dangerous." 3 days later, the story leaked. Public reaction exploded. Hero. Rule breaker. Human being. Threat to tradition. Thomas was reassigned. Not fired. But removed from ceremonial duties. East Gate. Minimal visibility. No press. He accepted it without complaint. But inside his locker later that day he found an envelope. Inside was a simple card. No royal seal. Just a handwritten note. "Thank you for choosing humanity. Some warmth cannot be measured in degrees." See. Thomas sat down slowly. For the first time since the ceremony, he smiled. But across the palace, tension was building. Because Catherine had made a decision. And Queen Camilla had made one too. So, kindness and tradition were going to collide in a way the monarchy hadn't faced in generations. The consequence no one expected. The East Gate was quiet. Too quiet. Royal Guard Thomas Hale stood at his new post, boots perfectly aligned with the painted stone line, shoulders squared, eyes forward. No crowds. No ceremonies. No cameras. Just wind and time to think. The reassignment wasn't called punishment. But everyone in the guard knew what it meant. You had been moved out of sight. Out of history. Out of importance. Thomas didn't resent it. Not really. But every time the wind cut through his thinner jacket, he remembered the weight of the cloak he had placed over Catherine's shoulders, and how natural that moment had felt. Like instinct. Like duty. Like being human. Inside the palace, things were far less quiet. News outlets had picked up the story faster than anyone expected. Royal Guard breaks protocol to help princess in the cold. Humanity over tradition? Palace sources divided. The moment that showed the royals are human, or rules are cracking. Social media turned Thomas into something he never wanted to be. A symbol. Veterans praised him. Military families praised him. Ordinary citizens called him the guard who remembered she was a person. The palace press office worked overtime trying to keep the narrative neutral. But public emotion was hard to control. And Catherine read every word. She sat in a private lounge, tablet in hand, scrolling slowly. Not obsessively. Thoughtfully. Prince William walked in quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You shouldn't read the comments," he said gently. "I'm not reading comments," she replied. "I'm reading how people feel." He sat beside her. "And how do they feel?" She turned the screen toward him. Thousands of messages. Stories from nurses. From soldiers. From teachers. From mothers. Stories about moments when small kindness changed everything. William exhaled slowly. "This is getting bigger than the palace likes." "I know. And bigger than Camilla likes." Catherine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Across another wing of the palace, Queen Camilla sat in a private strategy meeting with senior advisors. "This cannot become a precedent," one advisor said carefully. "If guards begin acting independently during global ceremonies, we risk diplomatic embarrassment." Camilla nodded slowly. She wasn't angry. She was calculating. "What is public sentiment?" she asked. "Overwhelmingly supportive of the guard, ma'am." "And of Catherine?" "Yes, ma'am." Silence filled the room. Finally Camilla said quietly, "Then we don't fight public kindness." The advisors relaxed slightly. "We redirect it." 2 days later, the palace released an announcement. New initiative, the Royal Service and Kindness Recognition Program. Publicly it was framed as heavy checkmark honoring military service, heavy checkmark highlighting community heroes, heavy checkmark recognizing acts of compassion across the UK. Privately, it was damage control. But Catherine saw something else. Opportunity. She requested a private audience with Camilla. The meeting took place in a sunlit sitting room overlooking Winter Gardens. Camilla poured tea herself. A gesture of control. "Catherine," she said politely. "Your Majesty." They sat. Careful distance between them. "I assume this is about the guard," Camilla said. "It's about what he represents," Catherine replied. Camilla stirred her tea slowly. "And what do you believe he represents?" Catherine met her gaze. "That the monarchy is strongest when it remembers people are human first." Camilla studied her for a long moment. You think I've forgotten that? No, Catherine said softly. I think you're afraid if we show it too openly, we lose control. The air went very still. Then Camilla surprised her. I spent my entire adult life being told I didn't belong here, Camilla said quietly. I learned early, emotion is used against you. Catherine didn't interrupt. So yes, Camilla continued, I value structure, protocol, control. Because without it, this institution falls apart. Catherine leaned forward slightly. Or maybe it evolves. Another long silence. Finally Camilla set down her cup. The guard remains reassigned, she said. But Catherine waited. He will be invited to the winter honors reception. It wasn't a reversal. But it wasn't punishment anymore either. And both women knew it. At the East Gate, Thomas received the invitation 2 days later. He read it 3 times. Then once more. He wasn't naive. He knew this was political. But still, it meant he hadn't been erased. The winter honors reception was held under heated glass tents in the palace courtyard. Military personnel, veterans, emergency workers, community leaders. Thomas stood near the back with his unit. Invisible. Comfortable being invisible. Until Catherine entered. She wore ivory. Simple. Elegant. Warm. And when she moved through the crowd she made eye contact with people. Really saw them. Then she saw him. And she changed direction. The room subtly noticed. Not dramatically. But enough. She stopped in front of him. Officer Hale, she said warmly. He bowed slightly. Your Royal Highness. Thank you for attending. Thank you for inviting me, ma'am. She lowered her voice slightly. I meant what I wrote. His throat tightened slightly. I was just doing my job. You did more than that, she said. You reminded me what this role is supposed to mean. Across the room Camilla watched. Not angry. Not approving. Watching. Studying. Learning. Later that night, William found Catherine standing on their balcony. You changed something tonight, he said. I didn't mean to. Yes, you did. She smiled faintly. Maybe. William leaned beside her. You know this isn't over. I know. And Camilla? Catherine looked out over the palace lights. I think she's deciding whether kindness is a threat. Pause. Or a strength. At the East Gate the next morning, Thomas returned to duty. Same post. Same cold wind. But something had changed. Not his rank. Not his assignment. Something deeper. Because now, the palace knew his name. And more importantly, so did the people. And inside the palace walls, the balance between tradition and compassion had begun to shift. Slowly. Quietly. Irreversibly. The moment tradition was tested in public. Winter deepened over London. The palace gardens had turned silver with frost, and every morning the staff walked carefully across frozen stone paths, breath hanging in the air like ghosts of conversation. Inside the palace, however, things were anything but frozen. They were shifting. Slowly. Quietly. But undeniably. The Royal Service and Kindness Recognition Program had begun receiving nominations from across the country. Thousands of them. Letters handwritten by children. Emails from hospitals. Submissions from military units. Stories of bus drivers helping lost elderly passengers. Neighbors feeding families who had fallen on hard times. Firefighters rescuing pets when they didn't have to. The public response was overwhelming. And Catherine read as many as she could herself. Late one evening, she sat cross-legged on a sofa in her private sitting room, reading nomination letters stacked beside her like small towers of human stories. Prince William leaned in the doorway watching her. You're supposed to have staff summarize those, he said gently. I know. But you're reading every one. Yes. Why? She didn't look up immediately. Because if I'm going to stand on a stage and tell people kindness matters, I need to remember what it actually looks like. William smiled faintly. This was why people trusted her. Across the palace, Queen Camilla reviewed the same initiative reports with a very different lens. Public approval rating has increased, an advisor said. Especially among younger demographics. Camilla nodded. And inside the institution? The advisor hesitated. Mixed, ma'am. Explain. Some senior staff believe the initiative makes the monarchy appear softer. Camilla's lips pressed together slightly. And others? Others believe it makes the monarchy appear more human. Silence settled over the room. Camilla dismissed the advisors. Then remained seated alone. Staring at the report. She had spent decades learning survival inside structures built long before she was born. Structures that did not reward vulnerability. But she could not ignore one fact. The public was not reacting to weakness. They were reacting to authenticity. Meanwhile, Royal Guard Thomas Hale had returned to routine duty, but life had not returned to normal. Veterans occasionally nodded to him when entering palace grounds. Some younger guards treated him with quiet respect. Others treated him carefully, like standing too close to controversy might be contagious. Thomas ignored all of it. He focused on his job. That was how he stayed grounded. Until the announcement came. The Royal Kindness Initiative would host its first public recognition ceremony. And unexpectedly, Thomas's unit was assigned ceremonial support. Not frontline position, but inside the event. It was a signal. Small, but real. The ceremony took place in a historic hall inside the palace, broadcast to national media. Recipients stood in rows, ordinary people who had done extraordinary small things. A nurse who stayed after shift to comfort families. A teenager who organized food drives. A train conductor who saved a lost child from boarding the wrong train. And among the ceremonial guard presence, Thomas stood quietly along the wall. Invisible again. Comfortable again. Until Catherine entered the hall. The applause was warm, genuine, not forced. She spoke without notes. "We often celebrate the loudest moments of heroism," she said. "But today, we honor the quiet ones." Her voice was steady, but deeply personal. Because kindness rarely makes headlines. But it builds nations. The hall fell silent. Then she added something no one in palace planning had expected. Sometimes kindness happens in places where rules are strongest. A ripple of tension moved through the room. Camera operators adjusted instinctively. Some staff members froze. Camilla, seated in the front row beside the king, went very still. Catherine continued. "And sometimes, choosing compassion is the bravest form of service." Her eyes moved across the room. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Until they landed on Thomas. Just for half a second. But he felt it. And so did Camilla. The speech ended. The applause was louder this time. Not polite. Real. After the ceremony, recipients met the royals in a receiving line. Thomas expected to leave quietly with his unit. Instead, an aide approached him. "Officer Hale, Her Royal Highness requests your presence briefly." His heart dropped. Not from fear. From awareness. This was visible. Public. Intentional. He followed the aide. Catherine stood near a side corridor, away from main cameras, but not completely hidden. "Officer Hale," she said warmly. "Ma'am? I wanted you to know, this initiative exists partly because of that day." He blinked slightly. "I didn't do anything special, ma'am." She smiled gently. "You reminded me what service actually means." Behind her, footsteps approached. Both turned. Queen Camilla stood a few meters away. Not interrupting. Just present. Watching. Measuring. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Camilla surprised both of them. "Officer Hale," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You broke protocol." "Yes, ma'am." "And you would do it again?" He hesitated only 1 second. "Yes, ma'am." The corridor went silent. Then Camilla gave the smallest nod. "Good." Catherine blinked in surprise. Camilla turned to her. "The institution survives because of discipline," she said quietly. Then after a pause. "But it remains respected, because of moments like that." And with that she walked away, leaving both of them standing there, stunned. Later that night, Catherine stood alone in the palace chapel. Not praying. Thinking. Because something fundamental had shifted. Not publicly. Not officially. But internally. Tradition had not broken. But it had bent. And sometimes, that was how real change began. At the east gate the next morning, the wind still cut cold. Thomas still stood perfectly still. But something felt different. Not easier. Not safer. But more meaningful. Because now he understood something clearly. Sometimes history didn't change with grand speeches. Sometimes. It changed because one person chose kindness when no one expected it. Inside the palace, Queen Camilla stood at her window again, watching frost melt slowly under morning sunlight. "Perhaps," she murmured quietly to herself, "strength and compassion were never opposites." And far beyond palace walls, the public kept sending stories of kindness. Thousands more. Because people had seen something. And once people see humanity in power, they never forget it. The decision that redefined royal strength. Spring had not yet arrived, but winter had begun to loosen its grip on London. The palace gardens showed the first signs of change, thin green shoots pushing through soil that had been frozen for months. Inside the palace, a similar thaw was happening. Quietly, carefully, but undeniably. The Royal Kindness Initiative had become something far larger than anyone inside the institution had predicted. What began as a controlled public program was now a movement. Schools were hosting kindness assemblies. Military units submitted group nominations. Local councils created community recognition boards inspired by the initiative. Even international press began covering it. Not as a publicity campaign, but as cultural change. Catherine saw it growing every day. And she understood something deeply now. This was no longer about one guard, or one moment, or one cold morning. It was about what kind of future the monarchy would represent. One morning, she sat in a strategy meeting with senior advisors, reviewing global media reactions. The program is strengthening public trust, one communications director said, particularly among younger generations. Another advisor added carefully, but there is still internal concern about precedent. Catherine nodded. I understand. What we do publicly shapes expectations privately. She paused, then said something that shifted the entire tone of the room. Then we should shape those expectations intentionally. The advisors exchanged glances, because this was not just compassion speaking anymore. This was leadership. Across another wing, Queen Camilla reviewed her own briefings. Public trust metrics, institutional stability reports, media tone analysis. She read everything, carefully, because she had learned long ago that survival in royal life required understanding storms before they arrived. One report stood out. Public perception summary. The monarchy is viewed as more relatable, stable, and emotionally intelligent since launch of Kindness Initiative. Camilla leaned back slowly. Emotionally intelligent. 30 years ago, that phrase would have been considered dangerous inside royal circles. Now it was being described as strength. She closed the file and made a decision. That afternoon, Camilla requested a private meeting with Catherine. No aides. No note-takers. Just tea. The same sunlit sitting room as before. But this time the atmosphere was different. Less defensive. More reflective. Camilla poured tea herself again. But this time she handed Catherine the cup directly. A subtle shift in tone. I've been reviewing public response, Camilla said. So have I, Catherine replied. Camilla sat across from her. For most of my life, she said slowly, I believe the institution survived by appearing unshakable. Catherine listened quietly. No visible weakness. No emotional unpredictability. No deviation. Camilla paused. But the world has changed. The words hung in the air. Catherine said nothing. She let Camilla continue. I was afraid, Camilla admitted quietly. Afraid that if we loosened protocol, we would lose authority. Catherine spoke gently. And now? Camilla exhaled slowly. Now I think authority may come from something else. Catherine felt something shift inside her chest. Oh. Camilla met her eyes. Consistency matters, she said. Tradition matters. Then after a long pause. But humanity matters too. The tension between them, built over months, softened. Not gone, but transformed. 3 days later, a new palace announcement was drafted. Not by press teams alone, but jointly reviewed by both Catherine and Camilla. The message was careful, measured, but powerful. New royal guidance. Ceremonial personnel are authorized to exercise judgment in situations involving immediate physical well-being or safety concerns, within defined boundaries. Inside palace culture. This was massive. It didn't remove protocol. It evolved it. And everyone knew where that shift had begun. At the East Gate, Thomas Hale learned about the update like everyone else. Through internal briefing. He read it twice. Then folded the document carefully. Not proud. Not triumphant. Just thoughtful. Because he never wanted to be the reason rules changed. But he understood something now. Sometimes systems needed small shocks to grow stronger. A week later, Thomas received something unexpected. Reassignment notice. Ceremonial rotation. Not permanent, but official. Return to visible duty cycles. He sat quietly for a long time after reading it, then returned to training without telling anyone, because attention had never been what he wanted. The first ceremony he returned to was smaller. Local military recognition. But still public. Still visible. As he stood in formation, wind moving across the open square, he felt something settle inside him. Not pride, not relief, just purpose. Because now, he understood exactly why he served. During the ceremony, Catherine passed the guard line. She did not stop, did not acknowledge him publicly, because she didn't need to anymore. But as she passed, she gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable, but intentional. And Thomas returned his focus forward, exactly as protocol required. But inside, he felt steady in a way he never had before. Later that evening, William found Catherine reviewing speech drafts. "You look different," he said. "How?" "More certain." She smiled faintly. "I think I understand something now." "What?" "Strength isn't about never bending." She looked out the window toward Palace Gardens. "It's about knowing when bending prevents something from breaking." William nodded slowly, because he knew she wasn't just talking about the monarchy. She was talking about history. That night, Queen Camilla stood again at her window, watching palace lights glow against dark sky. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was defending the institution. She felt like she was helping it evolve. And strangely, that felt stronger. Across London, across the country, the stories of kindness kept coming. And now, they weren't just being celebrated. They were being protected. By policy, by culture, by leadership. Because one cold morning, one guard chose compassion, and one future queen chose to make sure that choice mattered. The legacy that outlived the moment. Spring arrived in London not with sudden warmth, but with quiet persistence. The palace gardens slowly transformed. Frost gave way to dew, gray branches softened into green, and the air no longer carried that biting edge of winter. Change rarely came loudly. And inside the monarchy, change had already begun. Months had passed since the remembrance ceremony, but the story never truly disappeared. Not in headlines, not in public memory, and certainly not inside palace culture. The Royal Kindness Initiative had grown beyond anything originally imagined. It was now studied by leadership organizations. Military academies referenced it in training discussions about ethical decision-making. Schools built yearly programs around it. And the monarchy itself had changed in subtle but lasting ways. Protocol still existed. Structure still existed. But now there was space for judgment. Space for humanity. Space for moments that couldn't be predicted by rulebooks. Catherine sat in her office reviewing annual reports from the initiative's first full year. The numbers were staggering. Millions of nominations submitted. Thousands of local recognition events. Countless stories shared publicly. But what mattered most to her were the handwritten letters. She kept a small box of them in her desk. On difficult days she read them. Reminders that leadership wasn't about being untouchable. It was about being responsible for the emotional tone of a nation. William entered quietly. "You're reading them again?" he said gently. "Yes." "Good day or hard day?" She smiled softly. "Important day." He sat across from her. "You're speaking tonight." "I know." "You're ready?" She nodded. Because tonight wasn't just another royal speech. Tonight marked 1 year since the initiative launched publicly. And for the first time, both Catherine and Camilla would speak together. Across the palace, Camilla prepared as well. Her speech sat on the desk in front of her. But she wasn't reading it. She was thinking about something else. The corridor conversation months ago. The simple, direct honesty of one guard. The quiet determination of one woman who refused to let compassion be treated as weakness. Camilla adjusted her gloves slowly. Because she understood something now she hadn't before. Institutions didn't collapse when they showed humanity. They survived longer. The anniversary event was held in a historic London hall filled with service members, civilians, teachers, doctors, emergency workers, volunteers, and community leaders. The room buzzed with warmth. Not royal spectacle. Something more grounded. More real. Cameras broadcast live nationwide. Catherine spoke first. She didn't talk about policy. She didn't talk about the monarchy. She talked about people. Kindness is often treated like something small, she said. Something quiet. Something secondary. She paused. But kindness is what determines how power is remembered. The room fell silent. Because titles fade. Positions change. But how you treat people becomes history. The applause came slowly. Then grew stronger. Then Camilla stepped forward. For many watching, this was the moment everyone was waiting for. She stood calmly. Confident. Measured. But softer than she might have been years ago. For most of history, Camilla said, strength has been defined as endurance. She paused. And endurance matters. But endurance alone does not inspire loyalty. The room leaned in. People do not give their trust to institutions that feel distant. Another pause. They give their trust to institutions that remember they serve human lives. It was subtle, but profound. And Catherine felt it beside her. Not opposition, not rivalry, partnership. After the speeches, guests mingled freely. No rigid separation. No forced staging. Just conversation. And among the invited service representatives stood Royal Guard Thomas Hale. Not spotlighted. Not announced. But present. Exactly where he preferred to be. Catherine saw him across the room. She didn't approach immediately. She finished speaking to guests. Then moved naturally through the crowd. Until she stood beside him. Officer Hale. Your Royal Highness. I'm glad you came. Thank you for having me, ma'am. She lowered her voice slightly. Do you regret it? He didn't need clarification. No, ma'am. Not even knowing everything that followed? He thought carefully. Then answered honestly. No, ma'am. She smiled. Good. Behind them, Camilla approached quietly. Thomas straightened instantly. Your Majesty. Camilla studied him for a moment. Then said something he would remember for the rest of his life. The institution is stronger, because people like you serve it. He didn't know how to respond. So he simply nodded. Because sometimes silence carried more respect than words. Later that night, the palace lights glowed warm against the dark London skyline. Inside, Catherine stood alone on a balcony, looking out over the city. William joined her quietly. You did it, he said. We did it, she corrected. And Camilla? Catherine thought for a moment. I think she didn't change who she is. She expanded it. William smiled. That sounds right. At the East Gate the next morning, Thomas returned to normal rotation. The same post where months earlier he had wondered if his career had ended quietly. Now it felt different. Not easier. Not more important. Just meaningful. Because he understood something deeply now. Service wasn't about recognition. It was about choices. The small ones. The unseen ones. The ones made when no one expects you to act. Inside her office later that day, Catherine opened her desk drawer. She took out the folded ceremonial cloak Thomas had once given her. Preserved carefully. Not as a symbol of rebellion. Not as a symbol of scandal. But as a reminder. That leadership wasn't about never needing help. It was about recognizing the people willing to help when you do. She folded it again carefully. And placed it back in the drawer. Because some moments didn't belong in museums. They belonged in memory. Years later, historians would debate policies. They would analyze speeches. They would study shifts in royal culture. But many would point to one quiet moment in winter. One guard. One act of instinctive kindness. And two women who chose to let that moment reshape what strength looked like. Because sometimes, history doesn't change in grand halls. Sometimes, it changes when someone notices another person is cold. And decides that matters.